Marcus Carter had always lived between two worlds, the one the public saw, and the one only a select few knew. On the outside, he looked like an ordinary man who had worked hard his whole life and finally earned the right to enjoy peace. His two-story suburban home sat on the corner of Maple Drive, surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and a yard that smelled of fresh-cut grass. Every morning, Marcus woke before sunrise, laced up his shoes, and went for a quiet jog down the empty streets. Neighbors would wave at him from their driveways, and he would nod politely, never saying much more than a friendly good morning. To them, he was just the quiet man with sharp eyes and a calm presence. But beneath that calm surface was a past no one could guess. For more than 20 years, Marcus had worn a badge that wasn't for show. He had chased cartel leaders across deserts, tracked cybercriminals through shadowy networks, and stared down men whose names terrified nations. His file in the FBI was thick with victories cases that made headlines without ever mentioning his name. Marcus had been the ghost, the shadow, the agent criminals whispered about but never saw coming. He was respected, feared, and sometimes hated, but never forgotten by those who crossed his path. When he finally retired from the bureau, he told himself he wanted nothing but silence. No more endless nights. No more tracking enemies across borders. No more danger, just peace. So he moved into the neighborhood, bought a home with wide windows and a back porch that faced the sunset, and tried to live like any other man. He planted roses along the fence line, set up a grill in his backyard, and even joined the local homeowners association meetings, though he never spoke much, just listened quietly. The truth was, Marcus liked being underestimated. He liked the way people saw only the surface, a man who seemed average, maybe even a little boring. It gave him space to breathe, but he never let his guard down completely. His instincts, sharpened over decades of high-stakes missions, never truly rested. He noticed details others missed: the strange car that parked too long across the street, the neighbor's dog barking at midnight, the deliveryman who avoided eye contact. To anyone else, these were small things. To Marcus, they were signals, patterns, possibilities. And though he lived in peace, Marcus kept his skills sharp. He maintained a private gym in his garage, with weights, mats, and a heavy bag scarred from countless strikes. He visited the shooting range once a month, not because he expected trouble, but because he knew trouble had a way of finding men like him. Even in his quiet life, Marcus carried himself differently: shoulders squared, movements controlled, eyes scanning without seeming to. The neighbors thought they lived next to an ordinary man, but they were wrong. Marcus Carter wasn't ordinary. He was a storm disguised as still water, and though he prayed for peace, deep inside he knew storms don't stay quiet forever. The afternoon was quiet, the kind of warm silence that wrapped around the neighborhood. After school buses had gone, and lawnmowers were finally shut off, Marcus sat on his porch with a glass of water, watching the shadows stretch across his yard. Peace had become his new rhythm, and though he never trusted it fully, he tried to let himself enjoy it. That was when he noticed the three men walking up his driveway. They wore dark uniforms that looked official at first glance, with shiny badges clipped to their chests. To anyone else, they might have passed for police. But Marcus saw the flaws immediately: the uneven stitching on the patches, the cheap material, the boots too new to have seen real use. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, standing in a triangle formation that was too deliberate to be casual. The one in front, taller and broader than the others, barked out orders like he had practiced them in a mirror. "You need to come with us. You're under arrest for violating community regulations," he said, his voice sharp but shaky underneath. Marcus raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. Community regulations. Arrest. It was laughable. Neighbors began to peek from their windows, drawn by the voices. Marcus stayed seated, swirling the water in his glass. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. The way they shifted their weight, the way their eyes darted not with authority, but with nervousness, told him everything. These weren't officers. They were frauds playing dress-up, and they had picked the wrong man's door. The second man, thinner with twitchy hands, tried to sound tough. "Stand up, now, don't make this harder." Marcus finally looked at him directly, his gaze so steady that the man faltered mid-sentence. Years of interrogating dangerous men had given Marcus a presence that words couldn't match. It was the kind of look that could strip away lies and shake confidence. He leaned forward slightly, setting his glass on the porch rail. "And if I don't?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. The leader shifted, clearly not expecting resistance. They had come thinking their uniforms and loud voices would intimidate him. They had no idea they were standing in front of a man who had faced drug lords in Mexico, terrorists in the Middle East, and crime syndicates that stretched across continents. Behind them, more curtains opened, phones were raised. Neighbors whispered, already taking sides. Some believed Marcus must have done something wrong after all. Why else would police come for him? Others felt uneasy, sensing something off about the whole scene. Marcus rose. Slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. He stepped down one stair, close enough now to see the nervous sweat on their faces. "Tell me," he said softly, "what law are you enforcing today?" None of the three answered. They exchanged quick glances, their confidence slipping with every second. Marcus knew then what he had suspected from the start. This wasn't about rules or laws. This was a setup, a performance. They had come to intimidate, maybe even harm him. But they had made a mistake they would never forget. They had knocked on the wrong man's door, and the storm they had awakened was already gathering. The air grew heavier as Marcus stood on his porch steps. The three fake officers, tightening their grip on the false authority they wore like costumes. The leader barked out another order, louder this time, hoping volume would mask the cracks in his courage. "Hands where we can see them. Step down now." But Marcus didn't flinch. He had stared down warlords with armies behind them, cartel enforcers with rifles at the ready, and assassins who didn't blink when they pulled a trigger. These three impostors sweating in their knockoff uniforms, trembling beneath his gaze were nothing more than amateurs playing at danger. Marcus let the silence stretch until their nerves began to unravel. Then, with deliberate calm, he moved forward, every step measured, every glance calculated. The tall leader reached for his belt, his fingers twitching near the holster of a fake pistol, but he never got the chance to draw. In less than a breath, Marcus closed the distance, his hand clamping the man's wrist in an iron grip, twisting until the bone creaked, and the weapon clattered uselessly to the ground. Gasps rang out from the neighbors who had gathered by now, eyes wide as they realized the man they thought was the victim had turned into something else entirely, the hunter. The second impostor lunged forward in panic, throwing a clumsy punch, meant to prove his bravery. But Marcus sidestepped with a fluid motion and drove his elbow into the man's ribs, folding him like paper. He hit the ground with a wheeze, clutching his side, unable to rise. The third man froze, eyes darting between his fallen partners and Marcus, who now stood calmly in the center of the driveway, steady as a stone, unbothered by the chaos. "You should run," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than a shout. But the third didn't run. Fear pinned him in place, his hands trembling as sweat dripped down his brow. Marcus took a slow step toward him, then another, until the man's knees buckled. With a sharp twist of movement, Marcus shoved him against the porch rail, stripping the fake badge from his chest and tossing it to the ground. The neighbors erupted into whispers, recording every second, their doubt turning into shock. These so-called officers had come to arrest Marcus, but now they were the ones at his mercy. And still, he didn't raise his voice, didn't brag, didn't need to. His actions were enough. Calmly, he looked down at the three broken men and asked the only question that mattered. "Who sent you?" Their silence was answer enough. They had no plan for this, no training to face a man like Marcus. They had thought intimidation would be enough, but intimidation only works on the weak, and Marcus Carter was anything but weak. The trap they thought they had set had turned on them, and in that moment, every neighbor watching understood one simple truth. These men weren't redditors at all. They were prey, and they had walked straight into the wrong den. The three men sat broken at Marcus's feet, their fake uniforms wrinkled, their confidence shattered. The neighborhood was silent except for the faint hum of phones recording. Every neighbor frozen in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Marcus, calm and composed, bent down and picked up the phony badge that had fallen to the ground. He turned it in his hand, studying the cheap engraving, the flimsy metal, then let it fall back into the dirt, like the worthless piece it was. The leader groaned, still clutching his wrist, while the second wheezed on the pavement, his ribs aching from the blow. The third remained pinned against the porch rail, too afraid to move. Marcus straightened his posture, his sharp eyes sweeping across them, and then slowly reached into his pocket. For a moment, the impostors thought he might be pulling out a weapon, but what emerged was far more powerful than any gun. He held up a small, leather case, opening it with a single flick of his hand. The golden letters inside caught the sunlight. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The effect was immediate. The crowd gasped, the whispers surged like a wave, and the impostors' faces drained of color. They had come here expecting to scare a quiet man into submission. But now they realized the terrifying truth. They had tried to arrest one of the most feared FBI agents in the country. The neighbors who had once suspected Marcus of being distant now looked at him with a mixture of awe and relief. Everything suddenly made sense: his sharp eyes, his calm nature, the way he always seemed aware of everything around him. The man they thought was simply private was, in reality, a protector who had lived through battles they could never imagine. The impostors, however, couldn't hide their fear. The leader shook his head, stammering, "Teeth, this can't be real." Marcus stepped closer, holding the badge just inches from the man's face. His voice low, but cutting through the silence like a blade. "You picked the wrong house. And you picked the wrong man." The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. Spoken with calm certainty, they carried more weight than any threat. The second impostor tried to mutter an excuse. Something about misunderstanding, but Marcus silenced him with a single, sharp glance. His stare was like a spotlight on their lies, exposing every weakness. "You wear uniforms you didn't earn. You carry badges that mean nothing. And you think that makes you powerful." Marcus's voice was steady, almost surgical in its precision. "Power is earned through truth, through sacrifice, through honor. And none of you know the meaning of those words." The impostors hung their heads, stripped not just of their fake authority, but of any illusion of strength around them. The neighbors whispered with new respect, some even ashamed that they had ever questioned Marcus's quiet presence in the community. The truth was undeniable now. Marcus wasn't an ordinary man, hiding in plain sight. He was a storm contained within calm waters. A man whose past carried more weight than their entire neighborhood combined. The impostors had tried to expose him, but instead, they had been exposed themselves. And as the badge gleamed under the afternoon sun, it didn't just silence the criminals, it silenced everyone. The wail of real sirens soon split the air, their red and blue lights painting the houses and trees in flashes of color as police cruisers screeched to a halt along Maple Drive. Officers poured out, weapons drawn at first, but the scene before them quickly told its own story. 3 men in counterfeit uniforms were sprawled on the ground or slumped against Marcus's porch rail, their fake badges scattered like discarded toys. The neighbors, who had moments ago whispered suspicions and filmed with shaky hands, now stood in stunned silence, phones lowered, their eyes fixed on the man at the center of it all. Marcus Carter didn't speak. He didn't have to. His calm stance, squared shoulders, and steady gaze told everyone that he wasn't the one in danger. Here he was the reason danger had been stopped. The officers moved swiftly, cuffing the impostors and reading them their rights, their angry shouts drowned out by the sound of heavy boots and clinking metal. The leader of the criminals tried to protest, insisting it was all a mistake. But the lie dissolved under the weight of the evidence and the quiet authority of the man who had brought them down. As the last cuff snapped into place, one young sergeant paused, his eyes narrowing on Marcus. He had seen that face before, not in person, but in photographs passed around training rooms, in whispered stories told by veterans of the force. Slowly, with deliberate respect, the sergeant raised his hand in a crisp salute. The gesture rippled through the silence, like a stone thrown into still water. Marcus returned only a small nod, his expression unreadable, but the message was clear. Recognition had been earned, and not by words, but by action. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, guilt heavy in their chests. They remembered the whispers, the doubts, the quiet gossip about the man who never said much at meetings, who kept to himself, who seemed too sharp-eyed, too watchful. Some had even believed the fake officers at first, ready to accept that Marcus must have been guilty of something. Now, shame colored their faces. The truth was undeniable. They had been living next to not a criminal, but a protector. A man whose silence came not from secrecy, but from a life of sacrifice. A man who had carried burdens far greater than they could ever understand. The impostors were dragged to squad cars, their heads bowed in defeat. One of them, filled with bitter rage, dared to lift his eyes and glare at Marcus. But the cold steadiness in Marcus's gaze broke him instantly, forcing his head down once more. Without a word, Marcus had stripped them of the last shred of false power they clung to. As the final patrol car pulled away and the sirens faded into the distance, Maple Drive returned to quiet. Marcus turned back toward his house, stepping onto his porch with the same calm, deliberate pace he had shown all along. He opened his front door, slipped inside, and closed it gently, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside, the glass of water he had left behind still sat half full on the table. He lifted it, took a slow sip, and stared out the window at the fading light of evening. Peace had returned for now. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with new stories, respect replacing doubt. Inside, Marcus remained steady, a storm contained behind calm eyes, and though no one dared to say it aloud, everyone on that street knew the truth. Marcus Carter was not a man to be tested again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends so they can experience it too. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories only on the Silent Side USA.